Hello, BookTube. This is Aaron from Aaron Read a Book or Aaron Read a Book. I've got a bit of a list video today. Uh, I, I've been on BookTube a year now, just over a year, almost exactly a year. It was a year on Tuesday, I think. And I, 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 I've fallen sort of out of reading science fiction, which is my first love. Well, not so much reading, but I, I read a lower percent of it now because I've been influenced a lot by the area of booktube I'm in. And there are some sort of sci-fi people in this area, but generally we're a sort of mix of genres and things. I'm certainly not a full literary fiction convert, but I read less sci-fi now. And I see a lot of comments in my videos where people say, "Oh, I don't really read sci-fi. I don't like sci-fi." So I thought I'd do 5 books that that people who think they don't like sci-fi might like, because I think sci-fi encompasses all genres in a way. I think everyone could find a science fiction book that they like, basically, or a lot of science fiction books they like. I just think they're a bit scared to dive in. So these are 5 books that are not very scary, don't have a lot of weird aliens and stuff in them, apart from one. And I will also recommend a slightly more intense version of them as well. We'll start with um, a book for the lovers of Victorian literature, and I'm a big Victorian literature lover myself. And this would be To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis. And if you're familiar with Jerome K. Jerome's Victorian novel Three Men in a Boat, you might recognise that To Say Nothing of the Dog is like the subheading of that novel. And Three Men in a Boat is a book written in Victorian times. It's kind of a funny romp about 3 friends going down the river on a boat. It's very good and very short. You should read it if you haven't. But Connie Willis did a homage to it. This is the second book in a series called the Oxford Time Travel series, I think it's called. But don't worry, you don't have to read them in order. And I actually think the first one is a bit bleak because it's set in the Black Death and it's a bit depressing. So I would try this one first, especially if you like Victorian literature. And this is about the restoration of Coventry Cathedral. So Coventry was very heavily bombed in World War II, and the cathedral was bombed. And basically, this is set in the far future, but they want to restore the cathedral to its former glory. And the only thing they can't get right is the bishop's bird stump. God knows what the bishop's bird stump is. It's never explained. So the idea of these Oxford time travellers, they're historians at Oxford University that can time travel, but they're very careful and don't or try not to change anything. So they want to go back to 1940, before the Coventry Blitz, find out the details of the bishop's bird stump and bring it back to the future. Things happen. It's not straightforward. They can't find it, for one, and for various reasons, the main character is sent back instead to Victorian times and Victorian London as well. And it's kind of a comedy romance romp, and it has loads of nods to Victorian literature and Three Men in a Boat especially. So it's very light, easy to read science fiction, and Connie Willis is a great science fiction writer. She's the writer who has won the most Hugo and Nebula awards, so she is well recognised in the field as well. But this is a very easy one to get into, and I feel like a lot of people go straight to Doomsday Book, which is the first book in the series, and it might put them off a bit because it's long and bleak. But this is a a great bit of fun. And the novel I would recommend after that one, if you like it, that's a bit more intense, is what a Domesday book. Go back and read the first one, but B, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which is like the origin of the time machine science fiction story. Also very short and easy to read, but a bit weird. Second, I couldn't do any science fiction list without my favourite author, and in my opinion the greatest ever science fiction writer, and that is Ursula K. Le Guin and her book The Lathe of Heaven. Le Guin's books are, I think, often quite good for people who don't read a lot of science fiction, because they're social science, or soft science science fiction. So she likes to explore philosophy and sort of political and societal changes rather than aliens and things, although she often does it through aliens, through alien worlds. There's lots of examples of this, but The Lathe of Heaven is a bit different in that it's set in 2002. I forgot what we called the 2000s then. And it's set in Portland in America, where she lived, I believe. And it's about a man called George Orr who is a draftsman. So he draws up buildings and things. So he has a creative mind. And he is having terrible dreams, and he takes drugs and stuff to stop them. But he believes that his dreams affect reality. So he's sent to a psychiatrist, who is obviously suspicious of this, but eventually realizes that George Orr's dreams do affect reality, and he does have some sort of power over the world. And the psychiatrist uses this to try and reshape the world or trying to better the world. So this was written in the 1970s, so 2002 is the future to Le Guin, and there is problems that we don't have, one of which is overpopulation, which arguably we do have. So the psychiatrist uses George Orr's powers, abuses the relationship they have, to try and fix some of these things, and all sorts goes wrong. But covers like this probably put people off slightly of science fiction, but this is just because George Orr's a draftsman. He's sort of reshaping buildings and things. But yeah, one of Ursula Le Guin's probably most accessible books, I would say, and she is generally quite accessible anyway. But this would be the first one I would recommend to start with. And the classic science fiction book that I would move on to, if you enjoy this one, is The Left Hand of Darkness, which is also an Ursula K. Le Guin book, but it's a much harder start, at least, because you're thrown into an alien world this time. This one's set on Earth. This is an alien world, but that one explores gender and the way we think about gender through the use of alien worlds and aliens. And she also explores Taoism a lot in this one, I forgot to mention. But yeah, great start. Then move on to her harder stuff, arguably better stuff. Next, we've got a thing, a British classic, an author that had a huge influence on British science fiction, and that's John Wyndham's The Midwich Cookos. John Wyndham, when I was at school in England, was taught in school. So I've read him since I was a teenager, because we nicked all the books from school. So this actually might be a school copy. I don't think it is though. I think I've got rid of all my school copies. Yeah, no, this one isn't. But yeah, he's a very influential British science fiction writer of the sort of 50s, and he was described by Brian Aldiss as a writer of cozy catastrophes, and although he kind of meant it as a criticism, they all owe a debt to Wyndham, and because they're cozy-ish, um, they're easy to read and they're a good start. So I think most people would have read the Day of the Triffids at school or since then. But the Midwich Cuckoos and the Chrysalids are probably my favourite of his, and I think this is Midwich Cuckoos is less, is probably the less alien one, in that it's set in a very small English village, and one day people can't get into the village without falling asleep, and they realise there's sort of a spell on the village, and everyone can't remember what happened that day, and and anyone who tries to enter just falls asleep instantly. This passes, and then the next day people can get in, but they soon realise that every single woman in the village has become pregnant, and when they have the children, there's 31 boys and 30 girls, I think. They're all born with golden eyes, so they know something's odd, and they know that it's not a human thing. And as they grow older, they start to realise there is something strange about these children, and they have abilities that humans don't have. And it's kind of, he loved writing about children, John Wyndham, because a lot of his books are about strange children or children with abilities, and it is very interesting because you fear the children. This has been filmed many, or at least twice that I know of. Most famously in 1960, The Village of the Damned, but I think it's quite a different telling of the story. But yeah, because they're cozy catastrophes of English village life, I read a lot of English village books that don't have weird children in them with special abilities. But if you like that kind of thing, give Midwich Cookos a go. And I would say the harder science fiction version of this that I would move on to, if you like that one, would be More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon, which is one of my favourite ever science fiction books. And that is, again, about children with special abilities and the evolution of humanity. But it's about something that he called the Homo Gestalt, which is like the people sort of coming together as, well, I won't go into any details, but it's a great book. But yeah, a bit more intense than Midwich Cookos. Next, I'm going to talk about a genre of science fiction that I think a lot of people forget is science fiction when they say they don't like science fiction, and that is sort of post-apocalyptic science fiction. And this is one I've just read recently, actually, a couple of weeks ago, and it's the Blue Book of Nebo by Manon Steffan Ross. It's a Welsh book that was written not long ago, and it's been recently translated into English because it was originally written in the Welsh language, and the author herself translated it. And this is a very sort of sweet, melancholy book with beautiful language, but it's about a mother and son in a Welsh village, or they're not even in the village, they're basically on their own. They've got one neighbour, and the end of the world happened in 2018, and they've just sort of stayed where they are, and they're isolated. And it's set in diary form, so it's the young boy who's I think he's a teenager now, and the mother trying to keep a record of what they do, and they take it in turns writing in this diary. And it's just beautifully done story of a mother and son relationship, and the son growing up in this changed world, and he's got a little sister as well, and there's some dark stuff with the little sister, and also you don't know where the little sister's come from because she was conceived after the end of the world. They haven't seen any other people apart from their neighbours who left. But yeah, beautiful language, just a lovely example of a post-apocalyptic novel, and it's very fresh, it's very newly written, so an easy way to ease into the post-apocalyptic fiction genre. And the older classic science fiction that I recommend to pair with this one, that I would move on to after, is Earth Abides by George Stewart. And the reason for that is Earth Abides is sort of a landmark early post-apocalyptic book. It's also my favourite post-apocalyptic book, but it's also very much about living on the land and the things you have to do after an apocalypse to actually survive. And yeah, I love that book. Lastly, the fifth book I'm going to talk about as a science fiction book that people might like that don't normally read science fiction is short story book. And the short story has been a fundamental part of the history of science fiction, maybe more so than any other genre. Like, a lot of people get started in short stories in science fiction, at least they used to. And I think the person who's doing this best at the moment, but very slowly, because he's only written 2 collections that I know of, and they're very far apart, and that's Ted Chiang, and this is Stories of Your Life and Others. Ted Chiang is a professional something, a mathematician or something. I'm not sure, something to do with computers. So he kept his day job. That's why he's so slow in writing these, but they kind of trickle out. And he writes just incredible, varied short stories. They also, I think, were very influential on the TV show Black Mirror. So if you like Black Mirror, definitely give him a go. But I actually prefer his other collection, but I think this one's a bit more accessible. So he explores loads of different things in this. One of the stories is about what if the flat earth theory was true. There's another one about people having there's actually a couple here about intelligence, explores intelligence a lot, and what if your intelligence was suddenly artificially increased. There's the most famous one is Stories of Your Life, which is about communicating with aliens, but from the perspective of a linguist. So it talks a lot about, or it explores language and how we communicate with each other, and how important that would be to, like, meeting aliens, which has been made into a film, that one, which is the film Arrival, which I thought was really good. And they did the language thing in Arrival really beautifully, visuals. There's one where that gods exist indisputably. They frequently are in contact with humanity, so they know that everyone on Earth knows they exist, and that explores the way people would behave differently if there was indisputable evidence of gods. And there's a really interesting one about there's a thing in the world where people can stop themselves being able to see physical beauty. So loads of people stop their ability to see physical beauty, and how that would affect the world. But yeah, he's a very interesting science fiction writer, and there's always been this tradition of short stories that that has always existed in science fiction, and I think this would be the easiest way to get into that. because he writes science fiction stories like they used to in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And the science fiction book I would pair with that, with book-wise, I would go with Flowers for Algernon, because that's about a man increasing his intelligence artificially, which is explored in Stories of Your Lives and others. But I would also check out a classic science fiction short story collection. There's millions, you could go for anyone, but I will give a shout out to James Tiptree Jr., who was a woman science fiction writer writing in the very early days, and wrote some very sort of sad, melancholic science fiction short stories, but very well done. And she pretended to be a man to get published. Right, BookTube, that's my 5 books to help you get into science fiction if you don't like science fiction, or if you think you don't like science fiction, and they're more hardcore alternatives. Let me know if you've read any of these, and have a good one, BookTube.